The wind howled like a wild animal, shaking the walls of the small farmhouse. Rain lashed against the windows, so heavy it sounded like 1,000 tiny hammers pounding on the glass. Inside, the family huddled together, trying to find some comfort in the warmth of the fire and the safety of their home. They had been through storms before. Living out in the countryside meant they had to be prepared for everything. But this storm was different. It was fiercer, angrier, and it showed no signs of letting up. Mark, the father, sat by the window, his brow furrowed as he watched the storm tear through the trees outside. "We need to make sure the roof is secure," he muttered to his wife, Sarah, who was wrapping blankets around their children, Emma and Luke. The storm was bad, but he wasn't overly concerned, not yet. But something in the air told him that this wasn't just another storm. It was something more. Buddy, the family dog, lay quietly by the fire. He was a scrappy mutt, rescued years ago from a shelter, full of energy and always by Emma's side. But tonight, something was different. He was restless. His ears flicked back, his body tense, as if the very air was making him uneasy. His dark eyes never left the window, watching the storm with an intensity that Emma had never seen before. "What's wrong, Buddy?" she asked, kneeling down beside him. But Buddy didn't look at her. Instead, his gaze remained fixed on the window, his growl soft but growing louder with each passing second. Emma shivered, unsure whether it was the storm or Buddy's behavior that was making her uneasy. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The sound of thunder rumbled through the house with a deafening crack, shaking the foundation beneath them. The wind howled louder, rattling the house as though it were about to give way. Sarah rushed to the window, her eyes wide with fear. "Mark, the barn, it's collapsing. We need to get out of here." Before Mark could react, Buddy sprang to his feet, barking furiously. His tail was tucked low, his body trembling with adrenaline. Without warning, Buddy darted toward the door, scratching at it frantically as if he had no intention of waiting for the family to follow. "Buddy, no!" Emma called out, but the dog ignored her, pushing through the door and charging into the storm. Mark cursed under his breath, grabbing a flashlight as he rushed out behind Buddy. "Stay close," he shouted to the family. "We need to move fast." Emma stood frozen for a moment, her heart racing as she watched Buddy disappear into the wind and rain. Something in her gut told her that this wasn't just a typical storm or a typical dog. Buddy's actions, his instincts, were telling her that they were in real danger. He wasn't just a dog. He was something more. He was their lifeline. As Emma stepped out into the storm, she could hear Buddy's barking in the distance, urgent, desperate. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure. Her dog wasn't running away from danger. He was running toward it. And so began a journey that would change their lives forever. Emma had no idea just how close they were to losing everything, but she would soon discover that Buddy was about to become the hero they never expected, the one who would save them all. In the heart of the countryside, tucked away in the embrace of towering oak trees and rolling hills, sat the small farmstead where the Harris family lived. Mark, Sarah, Emma, and Luke had made this isolated house their home for nearly a decade, surrounded by vast stretches of farmland and a dense forest that seemed to stretch on forever. The tranquility of the place had always provided a comforting sense of peace. But living so far from town had its challenges, especially when things went wrong. But it wasn't just the physical distance from the nearest neighbor or the weather that made them rely on one another so fiercely. It was the fact that in this home, every day was a testament to family and the love they shared for one another. Among them, one of the most loyal members was Buddy, the scrappy German Shepherd mix who had been part of their lives for as long as Emma could remember. His story was as much about survival as it was about love. He wasn't the most refined dog. He had a crooked tail, a few scars on his ears, and a scruffy coat that was always a little unkempt. Buddy had been abandoned as a puppy, left to wander the streets alone, until one rainy afternoon when Sarah had found him shivering near the side of the road. Emma had begged her mother to keep him, and with a soft-hearted sigh, Sarah had agreed. From the moment Buddy had arrived at the farm, He had become a constant companion to Emma. The two of them shared a bond that couldn't be explained in words. Buddy had been there for Emma during every milestone of her life, from when she was just a little girl, struggling with her shyness, to the tough days of adolescence, when the world felt overwhelming. Emma had always been the quiet one in the family, introspective and thoughtful, but with Buddy by her side, she had never felt truly alone. He wasn't just a dog, he was her friend, her confidant, the one who never judged her and always understood when she needed comfort. Buddy's loyalty knew no bounds. He wasn't trained to be a hero, nor did he have the sharp instincts of some working dogs, but what he did have was an unwavering devotion to Emma and the entire family. His daily routine consisted of following Emma around the house, lying beside her bed at night, and keeping a watchful eye on the kids as they played outside. He wasn't perfect. Sometimes he chewed on a shoe, knocked over a vase, or barked too loudly at the postman, but to Emma and to the rest of the family, Buddy was their protector in ways that went beyond anything they could understand. He had saved them from loneliness, from fear, and from the many small struggles life threw at them. Then there was Emma, their 14-year-old daughter, who was at that age where she was beginning to step into herself, yet still clung to the innocence of childhood. Emma was often lost in her thoughts, her eyes always searching for something in the distance, whether it was an answer to a question she hadn't quite formed yet or a dream she hadn't yet shared with anyone. Despite the quietness that made her seem distant at times, Emma's heart was big, and she cared deeply for those around her. The love she shared with Buddy was something that could be seen in the way she cared for him, making sure he always had fresh water, feeding him his favorite treats, and speaking to him with a gentleness that no one else could understand. Emma's younger brother, Luke, was the opposite of her. At 8 years old, he was always moving, always exploring, his curiosity about the world never tiring. He would often drag Buddy along on his adventures, whether it was climbing trees or searching for bugs in the overgrown grass. Luke had a special bond with Buddy too, though it was different from Emma's. For Luke, Buddy was a partner in crime, a fellow adventurer who was always ready to chase after something new, even if it meant getting dirty or being covered in mud by the end of the day. Buddy tolerated Luke's exuberance with a patience that only a dog like him could manage. Sarah and Mark, the parents, were the pillars that held the family together. Mark was a hardworking man, quiet and steady, who believed in doing things the right way. He worked long hours on the farm, fixing fences, tending to animals, and making sure everything ran smoothly. He didn't talk much about his past, but his actions spoke volumes. Sarah, on the other hand, was the heart of the family. She was nurturing, kind, and always put others before herself. Sarah's connection to Buddy was one of care and protection. She had been the one to find him, after all, and the connection between them was immediate. In her eyes, Buddy was more than just a dog. He was a symbol of hope, of second chances. The farm they called home was as much a character in their story as the people and animals who lived there. The farmhouse itself was an old, two-story structure with creaky wooden floors, a large kitchen where meals were always being prepared, and a cozy living room where the family gathered at night, sharing stories and laughter. The property stretched out into the surrounding forest, which Emma and Luke loved to explore on weekends, picking wildflowers and playing games of hide and seek. Despite the occasional isolation, the family found peace in the simplicity of life there. Yet, despite all the beauty and serenity of their surroundings, the Harris family lived with the constant knowledge that they were a little too far from the nearest help. The nearest neighbor was a mile away, and the nearest town was a good 30-minute drive. In many ways, they had built their own little world, one where everyone was dependent on each other, and life was lived one day at a time. They'd had their fair share of challenges, broken fences, sick animals, harsh winters, but they always had each other, and that was enough. But the storm that was now brewing on the horizon would challenge everything. It wasn't just the wind and the rain that Emma needed to worry about. It was what Buddy knew, what he had always known, that she had yet to understand. The storm wasn't just a test of weather or endurance. It was a test of loyalty, bravery, and the strength of the bond between a dog and his family. The storm rolled in without warning, a darkening sky swallowing the last light of the evening. It came quickly, ferocious and unforgiving. At first, it was just a few distant rumbles, a flash of lightning in the horizon. But as the minutes passed, the wind began to whip through the trees, bending them with unnatural force. The clouds gathered faster, blocking out the stars and casting an ominous shadow over the farm. By the time the first drops of rain began to fall, it was already too late. Inside the farmhouse, the family had settled in for a quiet night. Sarah was curled up on the couch, reading a book. Mark was in the kitchen, his attention divided between cooking dinner and keeping an eye on the storm. Emma and Luke were sitting at the kitchen table, playing a game of checkers, oblivious to the approaching storm. Buddy, as usual, was lying near Emma's feet, his head resting lazily on his paws. But then, something changed. The wind picked up, howling through the cracks in the house, making the windows tremble. The light flickered, casting strange shadows in the corners of the room. Emma looked up, her eyes narrowing as the storm's intensity increased. "It's getting worse," she said, her voice filled with unease. "Do you think it'll pass soon?" Mark stood by the window, watching as the wind howled louder, snapping branches off the trees in the yard. "It doesn't look good," he muttered. "We might have to close up the barn doors soon." Buddy's ears twitched. He lifted his head, his body suddenly alert. The calm demeanor that had defined him all day was gone, replaced by an unsettling tension. His gaze locked on the door, then shifted to the window, his tail still. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Sarah looked up, noticing Buddy's behavior. "What's wrong with him?" Before anyone could respond, the first deafening crash of thunder shook the house, rattling the windows in their frames. The storm was upon them now, and it was only getting worse. Another bolt of lightning struck nearby, so close that it seemed to light up the entire sky. The house shook violently, and for a split second, the lights flickered, then went out completely. The wind outside turned into a monstrous roar, whipping at the roof and rattling the walls as if trying to tear the house apart. Mark grabbed the flashlight from the counter, his eyes wide with growing concern. "We need to get to the basement," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "This isn't just a regular storm. Something's not right." Buddy, still on edge, leaped to his feet, barking furiously at the door as if he could sense the danger that was coming. His frantic behavior grew more erratic with each passing second. He started pacing back and forth, his body tense, as if he knew something the family didn't. "Buddy, calm down," Emma said, reaching down to comfort him. But the dog was beyond comfort, his eyes wild with alarm. He started barking louder, spinning in circles, his frantic energy contagious. Sarah stood up, moving to the door, but before she could open it, Buddy rushed past her, pawing at the door with urgency. "Buddy!" Emma called, but the dog was already halfway down the hall. It was clear that Buddy was no longer the playful companion they knew. He was acting like something was terribly wrong, something that they hadn't yet realized. The wind outside picked up, making the house creak and groan under its force. Then, another violent crash of thunder shook the walls. The sound was deafening, but it wasn't just the storm that had the family's attention now. There was something else, something worse. Mark rushed to the window and stared out into the darkness. "The tree," he whispered under his breath. "The big oak. It's fallen across the road." The realization hit like a punch to the gut. The one escape route they had, the one road that led to safety, was now blocked. The storm had knocked down the massive oak tree that stood at the edge of their property. But that wasn't the worst of it. The water was rising. The river that ran through the edge of their farm had overflowed, its swift currents creeping closer to the house with every passing minute. The rain wasn't letting up. It was only getting worse and fast. "Mark, we need to go." "Now," Sarah said, panic rising in her voice. The calm she had once maintained was slipping away. The reality of the situation was sinking in. They were trapped. Mark turned to Sarah, his face grim. "We can't go anywhere yet. We need to wait for the worst of it to pass, But we need to secure everything first. The barn's still vulnerable, and we need to make sure the animals are safe." Buddy barked again, louder this time, his hackles raised. He was no longer merely concerned, he was desperate. His entire body was vibrating with a kind of raw, instinctual energy, like he knew something terrible was coming. Buddy's eyes locked with Emma's, and there was an understanding between them. Emma could see the fear in his eyes, but it wasn't fear for himself, it was fear for them. His instincts were telling him that the storm wasn't just a natural disaster. There was something more to it. As the family scrambled to secure the house and gather their belongings, Buddy refused to leave Emma's side. He stayed close to her, watching her with an intensity she had never seen before. Every time she moved, he followed her, his eyes never leaving her, his movements cautious and protective. The storm's fury reached its peak. Another bolt of lightning struck nearby, followed by the deafening roar of thunder. The ground beneath the house trembled as the wind howled through the trees, bending them so violently that it looked like they might snap in half. The rain was falling so heavily now that it seemed like a deluge, drenching everything in its path. The water around the house was rising faster now. Mark rushed to the door, trying to assess the situation. "It's getting close," he said, his voice strained. "We need to make a decision. If the road is blocked and the water keeps rising, we're trapped here." Buddy barked again, more urgently this time. He was no longer pacing, but was now standing stiff, his body tense, watching the door. There was something in the air that Buddy knew, a threat, a danger that the family couldn't yet comprehend. In that moment, Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She looked at Buddy, understanding the urgency in his eyes. He wasn't just reacting to the storm. He was warning them. Something was coming, and Buddy was determined to protect them, no matter the cost. As the storm raged on and the family realized the situation was getting more desperate, they understood. Buddy wasn't just trying to protect them from the storm. He was trying to protect them from something much worse. And the storm's fury was only the beginning. The wind howled with an even greater intensity, the house groaning in protest as the storm continued to rage. The rain wasn't just falling now, it was crashing down in sheets, flooding the yard and turning the earth beneath their feet into a slippery mess. The water had already started creeping into the lower parts of the property, rising steadily toward the farmhouse. It was no longer a matter of simply surviving the storm, it had become a matter of escape, of getting to safety before the worst happened. Inside, the family scrambled to secure the house, blocking windows, covering doors with anything they could find, and making sure Emma and Luke stayed close. Mark and Sarah moved with purpose, their voices barely audible over the roar of the storm. Despite the urgency of the situation, Buddy remained restless, barking uncontrollably, his body stiff and tense. His behavior had crossed the line from concern to something far more unsettling. He was acting as though there was more at stake than the storm. Buddy wasn't just worried about the thunder. He was worried about something else. Something far more dangerous. "Buddy, enough!" Mark shouted, trying to grab the dog's collar to calm him down. But Buddy pulled away, his eyes wide with panic, his body trembling as he darted around the room. His usual steady presence had been replaced by a sense of urgency that was impossible to ignore. Buddy suddenly bolted toward the back door, his paws thundering against the wooden floors. Without a second thought, he pushed his way through the door as it cracked open from the storm's fury. Sarah and Mark both froze for a moment, unsure of what was happening. Buddy wasn't just reacting to the storm anymore, he was leading them somewhere. "Buddy, wait!" Sarah cried out, rushing toward the door, but Buddy had already disappeared into the chaos outside. She didn't hesitate. "We can't let him go alone." Mark followed close behind, his face drawn with worry. The storm was now a full-on tempest, with torrents of rain lashing out like angry fists, and the winds whipping in all directions. The once peaceful land surrounding the house was now a battlefield. Trees bent in the wind, the ground was flooding rapidly, and the darkness outside had swallowed everything whole. Emma and Luke clung to each other, eyes wide in fear as they watched their parents disappear into the storm after the dog. "What's going on?" Emma whispered, her voice strained. The once quiet farmstead was now unrecognizable, a place of chaos and fear. Buddy had always been a calm, steady presence, never afraid of the rain, the wind, or even the occasional thunderstorm. But tonight he was frantic. His behavior was not just a response to the storm. It was more than that. "Stay close, Luke," Emma said, grabbing his hand. She felt the ground shifting beneath them, the floodwaters creeping dangerously close. The water, dark and fast-moving, was already rising up to their ankles, pulling at the earth as it surged toward the house. The sound of water rushing through the yard was deafening, and the wind screamed through the trees, making it almost impossible to hear anything else. As Emma and Luke struggled to keep their footing, the faint, frantic bark of Buddy reached their ears, cutting through the noise of the storm. Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Mom! Dad!" she shouted, but her voice was lost to the fury of the storm. They couldn't hear her. But Buddy's barking continued, urgent and desperate. His calls were getting closer, and Emma felt a strange pull in her chest. She couldn't explain it, but something about the way Buddy was acting made her feel that they weren't safe. They needed to move, fast. Out of the corner of her eye, Emma saw Sarah and Mark making their way toward the barn, Buddy leading the way. The dog's ears were flat against his head, his body low to the ground as he pulled Sarah by the arm, almost dragging her along. His growl was deep, unwavering, and not like anything Emma had ever heard from him before. "Why is he pulling her to the barn?" Luke asked, his voice shaking. The barn had always been a safe space. Nothing had ever happened there during storms. It was a solid structure, built to withstand harsh weather. It had always been just another part of the farm, a place to store equipment, tools, and feed. But tonight, Buddy was insisting they go there. Mark turned to Sarah, his face grim. "We've never had to worry about the barn before. But if Buddy's leading us there, there has to be a reason." Sarah hesitated, but the urgency in Buddy's behavior was impossible to ignore. She followed, pulling Mark with her. "Let's check it out," she said, though her voice was laced with uncertainty. "It could be nothing, but we don't have any time to waste." The rain was coming down in torrents now, and the wind had turned the yard into a sea of swirling, muddy water. The flood had already begun to wash over the ground near the barn, creeping closer with every passing second. As they neared the barn, Buddy suddenly stopped. His body froze, his ears perked up, and his eyes locked onto the barn's wooden doors. Sarah and Mark had followed him all the way to the barn, but now, even they were starting to feel the weight of the situation. There was something off about all of this, something they couldn't explain. It wasn't just the storm or the flood, it was the way Buddy was reacting. He wasn't simply scared. He was warning them. "Buddy, what is it?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Buddy's growl deepened, almost a snarl, and then he lunged forward, barking fiercely at the barn door. He wasn't playing. His instincts were sharp, and his behavior wasn't just from fear. It was from a deeper sense of urgency. Sarah and Mark exchanged uneasy glances. They had to check what was inside. "Sarah, wait," Mark said, grabbing her arm. "It's not safe. If the barn's compromised." But Sarah was already moving forward. "We have no choice," she said, her voice sharp with resolve. "If Buddy's leading us here, there's a reason." As they neared the door, Buddy suddenly stopped barking, his body stiffening with tension. He stood at the threshold, watching the barn with unwavering attention. Then the door shook. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the storm. It was something inside. Mark felt a chill crawl up his spine. What the hell? Before he could say more, the barn door shook again, more violently this time. It was as though something, or someone, inside was trying to get out. The moment hung heavy in the air, thick with fear. The storm continued to rage, but in this moment, it felt as if time had slowed down, drawing the family's attention to the barn. Buddy's low growl filled the silence, his instincts now fully in charge. "What is it?" Sarah whispered, almost afraid to know the answer. Buddy, ever loyal, stood firm. Whatever was inside that barn, Buddy knew it was a threat. And as the wind howled around them, the family was about to find out just how dangerous that threat truly was. The rain had not stopped. If anything, it had grown even more intense, a torrential downpour that seemed endless. The wind howled, whipping through the trees and bending them until it seemed like they might snap. The family had retreated to the barn, trying to assess what was happening and how to protect the animals that remained. The floodwaters were rising, creeping ever closer to the barn's threshold, and there was no sign of the storm letting up. Buddy had been relentless. He had led them to the barn with a determination that was impossible to ignore, and now, with his growl deepening and his body tense, he stood at the barn door, his eyes fixed on something that the family couldn't yet see. He had been insistent. This was not just a shelter from the storm. There was something inside the barn that needed attention, something urgent that was beyond the storm itself. Mark wiped the rain from his eyes, squinting as he looked toward the barn's interior. "This place is falling apart," he muttered, his voice tense. The wind had caused part of the roof to sag, and the wooden walls creaked ominously as though they might collapse at any moment. The barn, built strong and sturdy, had been able to withstand years of wear, but this storm was testing even its limits. Sarah didn't wait for Mark to say more. She grabbed the handle of the barn door, her hand trembling with a mixture of anxiety and determination. She pulled it open, and as the door creaked, the sound echoed eerily across the yard. Inside, the faint glow of their flashlight barely illuminated the interior. The barn smelled damp and musty, a mixture of hay and earth, and the deafening noise of the storm outside made everything seem more distant, more surreal. But it wasn't the storm that was making Buddy act like this. It wasn't the wind or the rain. It was something else. Buddy's behavior grew more frantic, his body vibrating with tension. His tail was rigid, and his barking, while still low and urgent, carried an edge of something more. Sarah, feeling the mounting sense of dread, stepped forward cautiously, eyes scanning the barn's loft. The place was cluttered with old farm equipment, boxes, and hay bales stacked haphazardly in the corners. The shelves were cluttered with tools and supplies, none of which seemed to matter now. And then she heard it, a faint sound, so soft it could have been mistaken for the wind. But it wasn't. It was a weak cry, a whimper that broke through the howling storm. Her heart skipped in her chest. What was that? "Do you hear that?" she whispered, turning to Mark. Mark's face was pale. He nodded, his eyes wide. "It's coming from the loft," he said quietly. "But there's nothing up there." Sarah hesitated, looking toward the stairs leading to the loft. The wooden steps creaked under her weight as she moved toward them, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Buddy was already ahead of her, his body low to the ground, his eyes locked onto the staircase. His growl had turned to a bark, sharp and commanding, urging her to follow him. Without waiting, Buddy dashed up the stairs, moving faster than Sarah could follow. The barn's loft was narrow and filled with debris, but Buddy, with an uncanny sense of purpose, found his way through the mess, weaving between the stacked hay bales and boxes. His body pressed close to the wall as he maneuvered with an ease that Sarah could never have imagined. Mark was close behind, and together, they climbed the stairs, their feet slipping on the wet wood. The storm's fury outside made the loft feel like an entirely different world. A world where time seemed to stand still and the only sound was Buddy's urgent barking and the faint cry that was growing louder. And then they saw it. In the corner of the loft, partially buried beneath a pile of hay bales and debris, was an animal, a small calf no older than a few months. Its eyes were wide with terror, and its body was contorted in an unnatural position. The calf was trapped, its legs wedged awkwardly beneath the rubble. The weak cry Sarah had heard earlier was now a panicked bleat as the calf struggled to move, but the debris only pressed harder against it. "Oh no!" Sarah gasped, rushing forward without hesitation. The calf's legs were caught in the wreckage, and the animal's body was trembling with fear and pain. There was no time to waste. She could feel the water rising outside, creeping ever closer to the barn. They had to act quickly. Buddy was already there, his sharp teeth gently pulling at the hay, clearing a path toward the trapped animal. He nudged the calf's head with his nose, a soft whine escaping his throat as if to comfort it, before turning his attention back to the pile of debris. It was as if he knew exactly where to dig, where to push, where to pull. "Buddy," Sarah whispered, a mix of awe and fear in her voice. The dog wasn't just trying to protect them from the storm. He was trying to save another creature, a creature that had no way of helping itself. He was acting on instinct, on the same loyalty and protective nature that had kept the family safe for years. But this time, he was saving more than just the people he loved. He was saving the life of another animal. Mark moved quickly to help. "We need to get this stuff off him now." He pushed aside hay bales with frantic urgency, working together with Sarah to clear the wreckage. The calf let out another soft cry, and Buddy's barking became more insistent, as if telling them, "Hurry." The barn was shaking now, the storm making everything unstable. The family worked together, pushing bales of hay aside, shifting debris, and finally, with one last heave, Mark managed to lift the last piece of wood off the calf's legs. It was a close call, too close. The barn felt like it could collapse at any moment, but they had done it. The calf was free. Buddy stepped back, his body still tense, but his eyes softening. He had done his job. He had led them to this moment, and now the calf was safe, if only for the moment. But the danger was far from over. As they helped the calf to its feet, Sarah realized just how much time had passed. The storm had reached its peak, and the waters outside were rising at an alarming rate. The barn's foundation was shaking under the weight of the storm, and there was no telling how much longer it would hold. "Sarah, we need to move," Mark said urgently, his voice tight. "The flood is getting worse. We can't stay here." Buddy barked, his alert posture never relaxing, as if urging them to move faster. His actions spoke louder than any words. He wasn't going to let the family wait around and risk being trapped. He had saved the calf, but now they needed to save themselves. Buddy's heroic moment had come, and with it, a new sense of urgency. This was no longer just about the storm. It was about survival. The family quickly gathered their things, loading the calf onto the wagon with Buddy walking beside them, his protective presence guiding them as they made their way toward the barn door. They had to escape the rising waters, and Buddy, as always, was leading the way. The storm had reached its peak. The wind screamed through the barn, howling like a living thing, and the torrential rain turned into a deafening roar. The family's movements were frantic now. With the calf safely on the wagon, the priority was clear: get out of the barn before the floodwaters claimed it, before the building gave way completely. The water outside had risen to dangerous levels, now creeping up the side of the barn, threatening to engulf everything in its path. Buddy had been a constant, unwavering presence. He barked, paced, and tugged at Emma's sleeve, urging her to hurry. The family moved as quickly as they could, but time was running out. Mark and Sarah were at the front, pushing the wagon with the injured calf toward the barn's exit. Emma was right behind them, helping Luke, who was struggling to keep his footing in the rising water. Their boots were sinking into the mud, making every step harder than the last. The barn groaned under the pressure of the storm, and the sound of cracking wood echoed in the chaos. "We're not going to make it," Sarah muttered, her voice trembling. She glanced over her shoulder, seeing the water creep higher with every passing second. The barn was falling apart around them. "Just a little further," Mark shouted, his face tense with fear as he pushed the wagon with all his strength. "We need to get out of here now." But then, the barn shook violently. A deep, bone-rattling crack echoed above them, and before anyone could react, a heavy beam from the collapsing roof came crashing down, hitting the ground with an earth-shaking thud. The force of the impact sent debris flying, and the barn groaned, as if it was about to implode. Emma screamed as she looked up, only to see the beam coming straight toward her. She barely had time to move before the beam landed on her, knocking her to the ground and pinning her beneath its weight. The world went black for a moment as her body was crushed by the sudden impact. Pain shot through her chest, and for a brief second, she couldn't breathe. "Emma!" Mark shouted, his voice panicked as he rushed toward her. But the water, now ankle-deep, had already begun to surge into the barn with more force. He had to move quickly. Buddy, who had been running back and forth, barking desperately, froze at the sight of Emma trapped beneath the beam. His instinct to protect surged forward, his body stiff with determination. He didn't hesitate. With a desperate bark, Buddy leaped toward Emma, his teeth gently tugging at her sleeve. He was small compared to the weight of the beam, but his persistence and strength were enough to make Emma's heart race with recognition. Buddy wasn't just a dog. He was her protector, her savior. Buddy barked again, more urgently now, his growl low and commanding as he nudged Emma with his nose. His paws scrabbled against the wood of the beam, his body pushing with all his might. Emma, dazed and stunned, looked up to see Buddy's eyes locked onto hers, his expression one of complete focus. In that moment, Emma knew. Buddy wasn't just a companion. He was her hero. "Buddy, please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Help me." Buddy didn't stop. His teeth clamped around the fabric of Emma's jacket, pulling at her, urging her to move. With one last push, Buddy dug his paws into the ground and, with a burst of strength, pulled Emma free from the weight of the beam. The pain was unbearable, but the urgency in Buddy's actions fueled her resolve. She struggled to her feet, the storm still pounding around her, the barn shaking with every gust of wind. But Buddy didn't stop. He nudged her forward, barking as if to say, "Hurry. We need to go." With Buddy pulling her toward the door, Emma followed, her heart pounding in her chest. Behind them, Mark and Sarah struggled to hold the calf steady, their efforts hampered by the rising water. Luke, barely able to keep up, clung to Emma's arm as she stumbled toward the barn door. The barn was collapsing around them. Another beam fell with a deafening crash, but Emma, Buddy, and the rest of the family were already at the threshold. Buddy, despite the chaos, guided them forward, ensuring that Emma stayed ahead of the destruction. They finally made it outside, into the rain and wind. The barn's roof caved in with a final, thunderous roar as the water engulfed the structure. Emma looked back just in time to see the barn, now nothing but a pile of rubble, swallowed by the rising floodwaters. But they were safe. The family was safe. And it was all because of Buddy. But the danger wasn't over. The flood was still rising, and they had no way to escape. The only thing standing between them and certain disaster was Buddy's instinct and his unwavering loyalty. Emma, breathless and shaking, looked down at Buddy, who was standing by her side, his body still tense, his eyes darting back and forth as he kept watch. He wasn't just a dog. He was the reason they were alive. "I can't believe it," Emma whispered, her voice filled with gratitude and awe. "You saved me." Buddy looked up at her, his eyes softening as he nudged her gently, as if to say, "I will always protect you." Emma's heart swelled with emotion. She had always known Buddy was loyal, but now, in the face of death, she realized just how deep that bond ran. Their connection was more than love. It was mutual trust, an understanding that they would never leave each other behind. But there was no time to dwell on it. The family still needed to find safety. The storm was still raging, and Buddy was already leading them toward the higher ground, his instincts never wavering. As they moved through the storm, Emma could feel Buddy's presence beside her, solid, dependable, and unyielding. He wasn't just her dog. He was her protector, her guardian. And now, more than ever, Emma understood the true depth of their bond. Buddy had proven his heroism in a way that went beyond any simple act of bravery. He had risked his life for them, knowing full well the danger that awaited. And in the process, he had shown Emma something she would never forget. Sometimes, the greatest heroes don't wear capes, they wear fur and paws. The storm had finally passed. The once roaring winds had turned into a gentle breeze, and the torrential downpour that had threatened to drown everything had slowed to a soft drizzle. The skies, still dark and stormy, were beginning to clear, revealing a faint sliver of moonlight. The barn, once a sturdy structure that had stood for generations, was now nothing more than rubble, swallowed by the floodwaters. The rising waters had finally receded, leaving behind a wet, muddied landscape. The aftermath of the storm was overwhelming, but despite the destruction, the family was safe. Exhausted and shaken, the family huddled together in the center of their yard, the faint light of the moon casting long shadows on the ground. Emma sat on a weathered bench, her eyes still wide with the fear and disbelief that had gripped her moments before. She wrapped her arms around her knees, her body aching, her heart pounding, and her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. The near-death experience, the rushing floodwaters, the collapsing barn, it all felt like a distant memory now, surreal and almost impossible to grasp. But one thing was clear, they had survived. They had survived because of Buddy. The scrappy mutt that had once been an afterthought, an abandoned dog left to fend for himself, had turned out to be their lifeline. And now, as the storm finally calmed, Buddy lay at Emma's feet, his head resting on the ground, his eyes half closed in a quiet, restful way. There was no barking, no frantic pacing, only the stillness of a dog who had fulfilled his purpose. Emma reached down and gently stroked his fur, the warmth of his body comforting her as the adrenaline left her limbs. "You did it, Buddy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved us." Buddy lifted his head slightly, his tail thumping softly on the ground in response to her touch. He looked up at Emma with those familiar, wise eyes that seemed to understand everything. His usual playful demeanor was gone now, replaced by a calm assurance that only a true protector could exude. Buddy wasn't just a dog to her anymore. He was a hero, a loyal companion, and a part of their family in the truest sense. The rest of the family gathered around, still damp but alive, safe, and slowly starting to process what had just happened. Mark sat next to Sarah, their faces etched with the exhaustion of the night's events. They both looked at Buddy with a kind of reverence, as though seeing him in a new light. Their expressions were a mix of awe and gratitude, emotions that could not fully be put into words. "That dog," Sarah began, her voice still tinged with disbelief. "I can't believe he did that." Mark nodded, his arm around her shoulders, as if to steady them both. "He's something special, that's for sure. We always knew he was loyal, but this is beyond anything I ever expected." Buddy had proven that loyalty in the most extreme of ways. He had risked his own safety to save them from the collapsing barn, to guide them through the rising floodwaters, and to protect them when everything seemed lost. In that moment, Buddy was more than just a family pet. He was the heart of the family's survival, the one who had led them through danger and kept them safe. Max's loyalty was unwavering, and in the quiet aftermath of the storm, Buddy's continued presence beside Emma was a reminder of the deep bond between them. He stayed close, lying on the ground next to her, his head resting on his paws, his eyes flicking up to watch her every now and then. Max's protective instincts were still sharp, his body tense, ready to act at a moment's notice. But for now, there was peace. Buddy's unspoken loyalty was apparent in the small things he did. He stayed with Emma, never leaving her side, whether it was to comfort her during the chaos or simply to lie next to her, offering protection in silence. Sometimes he would bring her a stick, a token of his comfort, laying it gently at her feet as if to say, "Here, let's be together now." Each gesture, each moment, spoke volumes about the depth of their bond. Emma watched Buddy for a long while, her fingers idly running through his fur, her heart full of gratitude. In the silence of the night, the bond between her and Buddy felt stronger than ever. It wasn't just about the physical protection he had given. It was about something deeper, an unspoken understanding between them. Buddy had always been her companion, her friend. But now, he was her protector in the truest sense of the word. The storm had been terrifying, and the aftermath was filled with devastation. But in the quiet moments afterward, Emma knew that everything had changed. The love she felt for Buddy was no longer just the affection of a girl for her dog. It had evolved into something profound, something rooted in trust and mutual understanding. She had always known Buddy was loyal, but now she understood that his loyalty ran deeper than she could have ever imagined. "Thank you," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible in the calm night. "I don't think we'd be here without you." Buddy responded with a soft thump of his tail, a simple gesture, but it was enough to convey his unwavering devotion. He was always there for her. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, Emma knew that with Buddy by her side, they would face them together. As the night deepened and the rain slowly tapered off, the family took stock of the damage. The barn was gone, the yard flooded, and the house would need repairs. But despite everything, there was a sense of peace that settled over them. They had survived the storm. They had each other, and they had Buddy. The emotional impact of the storm was undeniable, but what stood out in Emma's mind most was the realization of how much Buddy had changed her life. He wasn't just the dog she had rescued. He was part of their family, a hero who had risen to the occasion when everything seemed lost. And now, as they sat together in the quiet aftermath of the storm, Emma felt the love between them stronger than ever. Sometimes, you don't realize just how much someone or something means to you until you're staring down the worst, she reflected aloud. Buddy showed me that tonight. He's not just a dog. He's family. He's my protector. And in that moment, she realized how much of her own strength came from the love they shared. She wasn't alone. Not with Buddy by her side. The family spent the rest of the evening huddled together in the warmth of their home. As the rain continued to fall lightly against the windows, Emma and Buddy sat together by the fireplace, her hand resting on his fur. The storm had taken so much, but it had given them something even more valuable, the realization of the extraordinary bond between a girl and her dog, a bond forged through loyalty, protection, and love. As Emma drifted to sleep, she whispered one last thing to Buddy, her voice soft and filled with gratitude. "You're the best friend I've ever had." Buddy responded with a soft sigh, his body relaxing as he closed his eyes beside her, content in the peace of the moment. The months that had followed the storm seemed to pass in a blur. Life had returned to normal, though it was a new kind of normal, a quieter, more intentional way of living. The aftermath of the storm had shaken Emma and her family to the core, but it had also given them something they hadn't expected. A renewed sense of closeness, of understanding, and, above all, of love. 6 months had passed since that fateful night. The barn had been rebuilt, the floodwaters had receded, and the family had learned to navigate the changes that had come with their survival. Yet, even with all the repairs and the slow return to normalcy, there was something that had remained constant. Something that had kept them grounded: Buddy. Buddy had never been just a dog. After the storm, the family had come to realize that he was more than that. He had become their hero, their protector, and their constant source of comfort. The bond they shared was now stronger than ever, and Emma, in particular, had grown to understand just how deep that bond went. She no longer saw Buddy as simply a pet or a companion. She saw him as family. Every morning, Buddy was there, lying beside her bed, his soft fur a reassuring presence as she woke up to face the day. Every evening, as the sun began to set, Buddy would sit by the door, his eyes following Emma as she went about her routine, always watching, always waiting, ever loyal. The changes weren't just in their bond with Buddy. The storm had forced the family to confront their own vulnerabilities, and in the aftermath, they had begun to rebuild, not just the house and barn, but their emotional connections as well. Emma's relationship with her parents, Sarah and Mark, had grown stronger. They had been through something that no one could have predicted, something that had tested their resilience and their love. And through it all, they had emerged more united than ever. Sarah and Mark had grown closer too. In the wake of the storm, they had leaned on each other more than ever. Their partnership, once strained by the demands of everyday life, had blossomed as they shared the weight of their family's survival. They had talked more, shared more, and supported each other in ways that they hadn't before. Even Luke, Emma's younger brother, had begun to understand the importance of loyalty and family. Though he had been too young to fully grasp the gravity of what had happened, he had witnessed the transformation in his parents and in Buddy. He had learned, perhaps for the first time, that family was not just about blood. It was about the ties that held them together, the promises they made to one another, and the loyalty they showed. But none of this was more evident than in the way Buddy had continued to watch over Emma. He had become her constant companion, always by her side, no matter what. It wasn't just about the storm anymore. It was about the unspoken bond that had formed between them, a bond that had grown even deeper with each passing day. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the property, Emma stood by the window, watching the world outside. She was lost in thought, reflecting on how far they had come. The storm that had once felt like an overwhelming force had been transformed in her mind, not just into a symbol of fear, but of strength, a reminder that they had survived, that they had each other, and that they had Buddy. Buddy was lying at her feet, his body relaxed but alert, his head resting on her shoes. He had been with her through everything, through the panic of the storm, the fear of the unknown, and the uncertainty of the aftermath. And now, as she stood there, looking out at the peaceful evening, Emma realized just how much Buddy had changed her life. "Thank you, Buddy," she whispered softly, her voice thick with emotion. Buddy's eyes flicked up at her, and he gave a soft thump of his tail in acknowledgement, as if to say, "You don't have to thank me. I'm always here." Her heart swelled with gratitude. The simple act of his presence had healed something in her that she hadn't even realized was broken. She felt safe. She felt loved. She felt understood. And that's when she noticed it. The small, quiet gesture that spoke volumes about their bond. Buddy stood up slowly, his tail wagging gently. He nudged her leg with his nose, urging her to follow him. Emma raised an eyebrow in curiosity but followed his lead, slipping on her shoes and heading out the door. Buddy led her down the path, his pace steady but purposeful, until they reached the edge of the property. Emma looked around, puzzled. There was nothing special about the place, just a quiet spot by the trees where they often went to sit. But Buddy had led her here for a reason. And then she saw it. On the ground in front of them, lying nestled in the grass, was a small bundle, a twig. It wasn't much, just a small stick, a token of the many sticks Buddy had brought to her over the years. But this one, this small act, held so much meaning. Buddy had brought her something not because he needed to, but because he wanted to show her, once again, that he was there. That he would always be there. Emma bent down, picking up the stick, and for a moment, she just held it in her hand, running her fingers over its rough surface. This simple gift, this small act of loyalty, was more than any grand gesture. It was Buddy's way of saying, "I'm here and I always will be." Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she smiled down at him. "You're my hero, Buddy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Buddy looked up at her, his eyes soft and full of love, his tail thumping quietly against the ground. Emma bent down, wrapping her arms around him, pulling him close. The simple act of holding him made her feel as if the world, with all its chaos and uncertainty, had faded away. Buddy's final act of loyalty wasn't in the big moments. It was in these quiet gestures, these small, meaningful acts that showed just how deep their bond had grown. He wasn't just Emma's protector in moments of danger. He was her constant companion, her friend, and her family. As they stood there, in the soft glow of the evening, Emma realized that the storm had done more than just test their strength. It had forged a bond that nothing could break. Buddy wasn't just a dog. He was her family, her hero. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma knew that no matter what came next, Buddy would always be by her side. As the screen fades from the final moments of Emma and Buddy's journey, we want to take a moment to reflect on what makes this story truly special: the power of loyalty, family, and the bond that forms between pets and their owners. Buddy wasn't just a dog. He was more than that. He was Emma's protector, her constant source of comfort, and her hero when it mattered most. The storm may have tested their resilience, but it also showed them the true depth of their bond, something that goes beyond love, beyond words. It's a bond built on trust, loyalty, and the understanding that no matter what, they would always have each other. Now, we want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment where your pet stepped up to protect you or showed you an incredible act of loyalty? Pets have a way of surprising us, of showing us love in ways we never expected. They become our companions, our family, and sometimes our greatest protectors. So, we'd love for you to share your own stories. Whether it's a dog, cat, or any other beloved pet, tell us about the special bond you share and how your pet has made a difference in your life. Have you ever felt like your pet understood you when no one else did? Have they ever saved the day just like Buddy? Your stories might even inspire others who have experienced similar journeys with their pets. Leave a comment below and let us know how your pets have touched your heart and changed your life. Your story matters, and by sharing it, we can all celebrate the incredible love that pets bring into our lives. And if you enjoyed this heartwarming tale of loyalty and love, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that will inspire and warm your heart. We believe in the power of animals to heal and bring families closer together, and we're excited to continue sharing stories like this one with you. Thank you for watching, and remember, the bond you share with your pet is truly something special. Whether big or small, your pet is a hero in their own right, and their love knows no bounds.